shaped by nature, landscaped by men. This is Bukit Brown Cemetery. At rest are the country's forefathers, whose collective timelines span 150 years of our development into modern Singapore. Their tombstones are touchstones in living memory for a new generation of descendants. This is our history from the hills. The Second Sino-Japanese War marked some of the darkest days in China's 20th century history. News of the atrocities committed fueled the anger of the Chinese in Singapore. Funds were raised and supply trucks from Singapore to Yunnan were organized in a bid to keep the fight alive. Little did they know that the Japanese had already set their sights further south. The first bomb fell on Singapore on December 8, 1941. Panic surged across the island as the bombs fell relentlessly. Even the dead were not spared. Ong Hui Lin, a retired teacher, recalls a story her father told her about the burial of her great-grandfather, Ong King Yet, during the Japanese invasion.
This is the grave of my great-grandfather, Ong King Yet. At the time of his burial, the Japanese were dropping bombs from Baba and his siblings. I gather that the grave was dug and the coffin was about to be put in. But before that could happen, the mourners had to jump in to hide from the dropping bombs of the Japanese. And then when everything was better, they would jump out and then he got lain in. And Baba would joke about it. After several years, he would say, you know, you can't be pantang. You can't be superstitious. You have to know that since grandfather loves you, nothing's going to happen, and that he would want you to save your life first. So that's the impression I have of the love from this man.
As Hui Ling sweeps clean the tomb linking her to her heritage, another part of Bukit Brown risks having its heritage swept away. Peter Park is the writer of a popular blog, Rojak Librarian. What started out as a memo on nature quickly evolved into a Bukit Brown heritage blog.
What I hope to achieve is cemeteries are just not about the dead and the dead have no voice. I hope that what I write about can be voices of these people who are buried here, and also to be some sort of lessons where we can learn from people who have contributed when they were alive to Singapore. So it's in a sense not just about a blog about history, but it's also a blog about stories. Okay, so this used to be the tombs of Mr. Tan Hak Wan and his daughter Ruby Tan. So you can see the peg number 1061 and in blue E. So Tan Hak Wan was recently exhumed.
Tan Hak Wan was the grandson of Tan Kiam Hock, municipal commissioner and the man after which the road outside Bukit Brown Cemetery is named. Tan Hak Wan, a beneficiary of his grandfather's wealth, had one of the most lavish wedding ceremonies ever held in Singapore.
The wedding itself was fascinating because if you research in the newspaper, it was the bride, Miss Lim Chin Chu, had $100,000 worth of jewelry on her. And of course, you just can't walk in the streets with $100,000 worth of jewelry in 1937. In that picture, she had 6 policemen guarding her and Mr. Tan Hak Wan in that wedding. So it goes to show to you how interesting some of these records are.
Peter's research into Tan Hak Wan's life tells us that he had played an active role during the war. In spite of his privileged upbringing, he chose to volunteer for the Straits Settlement Volunteer Force and step forth to serve his country.
He served for Singapore in its darkest hour. So just imagine just before the fall of Singapore with bombs falling on Singapore city itself. I could imagine Mr. Tan Hak Wan saving lives of people in dire straits. So, and as a result, when Singapore fell, he became a prisoner of war. And I researched and don't know the reason why he died or what caused his death, but he eventually died on 31st May 1943.
Buried alongside Tan Hak Wan was his infant daughter, Ruby, who died at the age of 6 months during the war. Affected by plans for the future highway, both graves were exhumed recently by their descendants. With further exhumations in the pipeline, it's a race towards the deadline for Peter to uncover more tombs.
So with the impending road that's going to cut across Bukit Brown, there are many, many stories which will be gone forever or lost forever. For a new visitor to Bukit Brown, you will not even spend a single glance at these two packs behind you because there's no tombs anymore to tell the story for them. So I was glad that at least I managed to document some of Mr. Hak Wan's stories and Ruby's story before it's totally gone.
While Peter races against time for information to feed his audience online, another man captures the attention of an audience face to face.
We live in a special time where the veterans of World War II are dying off. If you want to talk to these boys, you better talk to them soon. For the generations ahead, for the kids here, when they get interested in doing research about World War II, that source of information is gone. It's up to us to try and capture it for the next generations.
John Cooper is a war archaeologist based in Singapore. He conducts tours at various war sites across the island, and today he leads a group to Bukit Brown.
Hellfire Corner is the unofficial name given by the British troops to the Lorney Road, Syme Road, Adam Road crossroads, and it's now marked with this traffic lights. The British troops called it Hellfire because when you look at the topography of it, it actually sits high up on the hill, and it can be seen from Bukit Timah, and most notably it can be seen by anybody flying over in an airplane. And it's literally X marks the spots. Because of that, any Allied activity, any trucks, any tanks, any troops making their way across the corner, across the crossroads, could be spotted. Now, the key date is the 15th of February, because by the afternoon, that was the surrender date. So we find that the Adam Road, Lorney Road, is the last stop line that Percival put out, the last ring of defence around Singapore City. So suddenly, Bukit Brown becomes a significant site. This is the final stop line. The reservoir's just over there. If I can drive my tanks, drive my infantry through Bukit Brown, then I can get to Thompson. And I can go up the Lorney Road and get to Thompson quick, cut off the water supply. Well, it's not an ordinary hill. Psychologically, it's a little bit weird. It's a cemetery. You see in the diaries for the Japanese that they started off by thinking, oh, should we actually attack a cemetery? Because of ghosts and things like that. You know, it's bad omens for them. But then they got into it and said, oh, no, we'll carry on. Imagine what the Suffolk lads are thinking. You know, they're up here in this cemetery, a place filled with dead. Are they going to be dead next? Now listen. This is weird environment. They're not used to this in Suffolk. All these insects, all these snakes that are running around here, all the big ants and everything. Scary. What makes matters even worse is they're among ghosts. They've been put into a graveyard, for goodness sake. And boys used to literally disappear. They'd disappear off in that direction, they'd be wounded, and they were never seen again. And they'd go officially missing. So all the Suffolk lads who you see on the wall at Cranji, who died on the 15th, check them out, because they're probably knocking around here somewhere. See what we can find. I just think it's a perfect site because it's on the crossroads.
John has long suspected that fatalities at the battleground may have been hastily buried at mass graves in Bukit Brown. But to bring these Suffolk lads home, he would need to enlist the help of an expert.
And numbers of people not related to the deceased at certain tombs. At an era before name cards were popularized, two masons came up with a cheeky way to publicize their skill.
What deepened his suspicion was an unusual entry in the burial registry of Bukit Brown Cemetery.
Somebody was looking through the archives, look at the burial records, and bam, you get an entry there which specifically says 4 soldiers. Is it still there? Are the lads still in the ground? Who were those soldiers? In theory, they could be some of those Suffolk lads who were brought together and buried in one site. We can't afford to ignore it. We've got to identify it. We've got to follow it up. And if there's a chance of finding missing soldiers, then that'll be fantastic.
With renewed vigour, John seeks Raymond Goh's help to track down tomb 340, where 4 fallen British soldiers may possibly be buried. Raymond zeroes in on the cluster with ease, but the search would not come to be today, as the overgrown grounds would need to be cleared. Each step forward raises John's anticipation of locating the fallen soldiers.
I think the most heart-wrenching side of it is the missing guys. The guys who crawled out into the bushes here on the evening of the 14th in the pitch black with the wounds, and they were never seen again. There's no account of them. Their names appear up on the war memorial at Kranji. There's no graves for them. And they're out here still, we assume. Who's moved them, who's picked them up, where they're buried, we don't know. The chance to actually find a couple of these guys, identify them, and get them named, and get their sacrifice known, and take them up to Kranji and lay them with their mates, well, that would be a sensational thing for us to find.
15th February 1942, General Percival made the difficult decision of surrendering Singapore to the Japanese. The defeat of the battle at Bukit Brown, coupled with the loss of the Thompson water pump, proved to be the last straw for the Allied command. Shortly after the Japanese seized Singapore, they carried out the terrifying Suqing massacre.
Well, the impetus for a massive screening early in the Japanese occupation for anti-Japanese elements was imperative as far as the Japanese army was concerned. I know there's opposition. I got to weed out and screen the entire male population.
After weeding out dissenters, the Japanese army next turned their attention to the prominent Chinese leaders in Singapore for a different agenda.
The Japanese authorities and Shinozaki, they were looking for a man of influence who would command the respect and the leadership to run the Overseas Chinese Association. And Shinozaki had already heard of Dr. Lim Boon Keng, and he approached Dr. Lim to lead the organization.
Dr. Lim Boon Keng was a prominent doctor, reformist, and philanthropist in early 20th century Singapore. In 1921, he was asked by Mr. Sun Yat-sen to be the president of the University of Amoy, a position he held until the outbreak of the Sino-Japanese War in 1938. Taking on the role as the president of the Overseas Chinese Association would prove to be a challenge for Dr. Lim. His first task at hand was to handle an astronomical extortion from the Japanese to the sum of $50 million to atone for their anti-Japanese support in China.
Managed to raise 50%, about 27 million, and the other half was extended in the form of a loan by the Yokohama Specie Bank. With a total of $50 million, the OCA, through Dr. Lim Boon Keng as president, made the presentation at a ceremony in Fullerton Building on the 2nd floor to General Yamashita.
Dr. Lim Boon Keng bowed to the demands of the Japanese in a bid to save his countrymen, but much to the detriment of his relationship with the British.
After the war, the British rounded up all the collaborators, and Lim Boon Keng was, being a mastermind in the OCA, he was the leading person to be charged by the British for being a collaborator. Lim Boon Keng was very annoyed. He said, "You British left and abandoned Singapore, and now you come back and you putting the blame on us as collaborators because we had to survive.
The British eventually exonerated Lim Boon Keng of all blame as a collaborator with the Japanese. Dr. Lim Soo Min is the great-grandson of Dr. Lim Boon Keng. He recounts some memories of his great-grandfather.
The memories primarily of Chinese New Year, visiting kind old man with a white beard, usually in a white suit, sitting on his reclining chair, beaming beatifically at us, and his wife, Grandma, in the background, being kind to us and giving us goodies and things like that. That's my main recollection. I do remember his passing away, one of the early childhood memories of death, and a big procession with lots and lots and lots of people.
While Soo Min clears the tombs of his ancestors from the Lim Boon Keng line, Raymond Goh paves the way for John Cooper.
I went to search the records again, and I suddenly found that 336, 337, 338, 339, 340 is relocated to another area.
One of the most striking artifacts at Bukit Brown is this pair of sepoy guards. By the early 20th century, Singapore's second largest community were the Indians. From highly educated Sri Lankans and Malayalis working for the British, to Punjabis and Gujarati merchants, to the Sikhs who found a niche in the security line.
Bukit Brown guide Raymond Goh returns with war archaeologist John Cooper to Bukit Brown with new insight.
Because this is a tomb of a pioneer,
Yes.
and I checked his burial record, he's actually Block 1, Section A, 358.
358.
So it's only about 18 tombs.
Yeah.
So I start to explore this and I realized the one behind is actually 356 and 340A.
Oh, look.
This is A is not there. Sometimes they
340. I see the 340, but no A at the end.
Yeah. So we are there. We are at the correct.
We're in the right place.
We are in the right place. So we got a 340.
340. Give me a B.
Yeah. And then there's another 340 here.
But what?
Yeah, this is a.
That's just.
These are brothers, Teo Boon Keng and Teo Boon Cheng.
Yeah.
And they are buried actually in 340. Two of them. Teo Boon Keng, Teo Boon Cheng is there. 340, 340. Then 336, all those that we made. 340A is the Cheng.
Yeah.
And 340B.
He's turned. Where's he gone?
There are four. Instead of 4 soldiers, it turned into 4 children.
Oh. 4 children.
I rechecked again the register, and I found that on the 25th of March, there's another mention of 4 soldiers.
Yes, the 4 skeletons.
The 4 skeletons.
Yes.
And instead of being put in 340A or B here, the 4 skeletons are put as being dumped in a trench.
In a mass, yes, in an unknown grave.
And I believe that because of some mix-up, these 4 soldiers are actually, instead of being put here,
they were put. They were the same. It was another 4 skeleton, another 4 guys, and they put them in a trench. And the only record we've got is a trench. Our 4 missing lads, they are. Raymond says they're in a mass grave. As a military person and coming in from doing military history, I know that when soldiers. They look after their own very well. They spend an awful lot of time and effort when a soldier is killed to bury them properly and to take notes and so they can be recovered. And the result of that is places like the Kranji Cemetery, which is beautifully kept and all the records are kept and the guys, all the information about the guys is easily laid out. So there's an awful lot of effort goes into that process and to find that these 4 lads who have gone missing, they've been picked up by civilians and they've been laid to rest in what perhaps the civilians thought was appropriate, which was put into a trench. So the 4 children, are they still here? Or have they been...
Because they are children, so it might be unmarked tomb. Exactly where you're standing.
Yeah, which could be this here.
Yeah.
Something to do with it here.
Yeah.
It's a good representation of what happened on a wider scale, and it puts my mind... I get a better understanding of why we have so many missing and why we have so many names on the Kranji Memorial instead of having graves in the graveyard.
John Cooper fails to find closure for the Suffolk boys today. but he endeavours on. Meanwhile, Peter Park makes track and pays respect to another fallen hero.
So this is the tomb of Mr. Wong Ching Yok, and he's a policeman and the recipient of the King's Police Medal. And on his side is his only son, and on this side is Wong Ching Yok's parents. People are more familiar with the story of Lim Bo Seng and how he came back to Singapore to start a resistance force, Force 136. Wong Ching Yok tried to do that as well. He and 10 other policemen, his peers, left Singapore just before the fall of Singapore to start a resistance force in Indonesia. But unfortunately, one of his peers betrayed him, and he was caught by the Japanese, tortured and killed as a result. So while his body laid in a hospital, one of his followers managed to whisk off his body and buried it in an undisclosed location.
11 years after his death, Wong Ching Yok's remains were brought back to Singapore and laid to rest with full police honours in Bukit Brown on 21st September 1954.
I would say there are many people who are pioneers, prominent people who are buried in Bukit Brown, war heroes that are buried in Bukit Brown. I would give equal importance to all of them. They all had wonderful stories to share, and these stories, again, I felt should not be forgotten. And what I would say, these are the voices from Bukit Brown.
Bukit Brown Cemetery marks a silent testimony to the war heroes of Singapore, a legacy of courage and strength for future generations. The ravages of war may be a distant memory to many, but the memory of these fallen heroes is a reminder that the peace and stability that they fought for remain our most treasured assets in our days ahead.